everyone, and welcome to the India Climate Dialogues hosted by the City Climate Alliance at the National Institute of Urban Affairs. India Climate Dialogue is an ongoing series with our partner network where together we attempt to create meaningful and actionable conversations. Our topic that we're discussing today is operationalizing nature-based solutions in river cities. To give you a background, change in development in river landscapes over recent years has been increasing risk of erosion, flooding, pollution, and decline in groundwater resources, biodiversity, as well as recreational access. Indian river cities in particular face risks from development on floodplains, flooding due to blocked river channels, stormwater drainage, untreated sewage, and industrial waste polluting both river and groundwater resources. The nature-based solutions support both ecological and social needs and can potentially play a key role in developing resilient river cities. This dialogue will help us better understand the potential of nature-based solutions to address the risks faced by river cities. It will focus on the implementation, governing systems, and collaboration with partnerships through a cross-sectoral lens. To discuss the topic, joining us today are our esteemed panelists, Ms. Jaya Dindor, Director of Urban Development at WRI India, Mr. Manu Bhatnagar, Principal Director of the Natural Heritage Division at INTAC, and Ms. Aarti Nain, an advisor on urban cooling and heat management at UNEP. I'm your moderator, Ambika Malhotra. I work at the City Climate Alliance at the National Institute of Urban Affairs, and I'm also a Secretariat Manager for the India Forum for NBS. A warm welcome to all of our speakers and all those who have joined us today. Let us begin the dialogue by posing the first question to Jaya. As a core member of the India Forum for NBS, what really is nature-based solutions and how are they different from any other intervention towards disaster risk reduction? And how does NBS place itself with conventional grey infrastructure?
Thank you, Ambika, very much for inviting me to this very interesting dialogue on nature-based solutions. So first, let's start with the definition of nature-based solutions. It's always a sticky one because everyone has their own perception of what it is. Well, the IUCN defines it as solutions or approaches that protect, restore, and manage natural ecosystems and natural infrastructure. So basically, to put it very simply, these are solutions by the nature, of the nature, and for the nature. Now, they are different or unique in that they simultaneously can offer ecological, economic, and equity benefits. So when you're looking at nature-based solutions and how are they different from others, they can create ecosystem benefits and ecological integrity, lead to better ecological integrity. So they offer benefits to the urban ecosystem, including climate moderation and resilience, disaster risk mitigation, soil building, nutrient recycling, carbon sequestration, groundwater recharge, and all of those benefits. Simultaneously, they create social benefits or equity benefits. So solutions that are mitigating climate risk and are enhancing human well-being by promoting social, cultural, recreational, and health co-benefits, particularly health, by enabling social interaction, access to services, access to open areas, and the such. They also promote inclusion, and they are a way of strengthening community awareness about climate risk, adaptation and resilience. On the other hand, there are also economic benefits, and these are very important. So for nature-based solutions, you have to look at one of the parameters being delivering of economic benefits. So they help transition towards nature-positive economy. They are generating green jobs, better livelihoods, cultivating the associated skills and business opportunities associated with, the green economy, while maintaining sort of resource efficiency and promoting circularity. Now, the ways in which, these solutions are also unique is that while these solutions can deliver direct infrastructure services and how they blend in with the grey infrastructure, that while they can deliver direct infrastructure benefits, so for example, wetlands, which deliver filtration function, and also they also integrate well with engineered or grey infrastructure solutions. So for example, enhancing engineered infrastructure functions. So riparian forest, planting those, which helps reduce reservoir sedimentation, or rain gardens or green roofs, which help reduce the load on stormwater drains. Another function that they perform in tandem with grey infrastructure is protecting engineered assets or grey infrastructure. For example, you have roads along hillsides, and agroforestry on those slopes can protect the road from landslides, which is becoming a common occurrence when there's heavy rainfall in cities. So I think that is what nature-based solutions are. That is how they deliver the tri-fold benefits that we are seeking, which is different from other solutions, and that is how they interact with conventional grey infrastructure.
Thank you, Jaya. It was great to understand what NBS is and how it's envisioned for Indian cities that are growing rapidly. I think you brought an important point on how it can create green jobs and economy while also safeguarding the grey infrastructure. However, most municipal bodies are, busy firefighting on an everyday basis. And how can we help advocate, but also streamline systems, that help them implement solutions like NBS? And so my next question is to Aarti. As UN works closely on many urban heat management programs all over the world, especially the Global South, what are the types of policy and governing systems needed in an urban region to positively mitigate climate change through NBS?
Thank you, Ambika, for having me. It's a very relevant question, and I think I'll draw on probably all the work that UNEP has done in the last few years on nature-based solutions, designing and implementing and advocating for them. I think first and foremost, what would be relevant is developing a framework for evaluating the value of nature-based solutions. And they may not be just limited to cooling, but for across all benefits. It is very critical that we have a standard system of evaluating the benefits and the value. A key example would be Singapore, which has developed an index for biodiversity solutions. This has helped them in evaluating the value, which in turn helps both decision makers and investors from public and private sector to evaluate whether a particular project revolving around nature-based solution is financially viable or not and technically feasible or not. So that's one thing. And within these frameworks, it is important to also index nature-based solutions, inventorize them, evaluate them, and classify them either by the benefits that are accrued from them or their application. So let's say nature-based solutions for urban forestry, for city greening, for green buildings and green roofs. It is very important to classify them, which I think is missing. Equally important is that we institutionalize the dialogue between city authorities, developers, and investors. A prime example and a very successful example would be the city of Monterrey in Mexico, where the mayor initiated a joint commission on sustainable urban development and infrastructure development, wherein all the authorities from all the relevant city departments and the key developers from the city and the region were, there was a body constituted and they could interact. The result was that they were able to convince all the developers to start investing in nature-based solution, either directly through their projects or to invest in other projects. And in lieu of their work in nature-based solution, these developers were given incentives either in the form of fast-tracking the permits for their conventional projects. So that helped. And lastly, I think another key innovation could be, incentives for investing in NBS even for citizens. Now, this could be, we already have an example where we have increased FAR approvals for green buildings. That could be extended to nature-based solutions, both at the city level, in urban infrastructure projects, and within buildings. So I would recommend these 3 to 4 policy measures. In terms of accounting, one of the examples which is quite often quoted is from London. It has about 31,000 acres of public green spaces, and maintaining those is not easy. So what the city did was they did an evaluation of the value of these parks, and they also monetized all the co-benefits in this evaluation, including the increase in property prices of properties adjacent to these public spaces, green public spaces, health and physical and mental health benefits, because you're able to have access to recreational facilities. and lastly, avoided costs of these health issues. And the final figure was $91 billion. That was the value that they arrived at. And once they had this value, they were able to actually successfully ask for higher budgetary allocations, both from the central government and from within the overall city taxation system, to maintain these parks and, in fact, to increase the green cover in the city. So I think that's a very good example. And the other is, cities in Spain are using their, and this is directly related to cooling with water, which was our original theme, is in Spain, they had these systems of aqueducts running beneath the city, which use the river water for cooling. So they are regenerating it both through a increased taxation system, and also from, it's a combination of increased taxation and also grants from other agencies.
These are all valid points where we need to have a framework to evaluate, classify, and break down the categories of an NBS solution, and the need for more studies, and the essential necessity for collaborative processes between institutions. Brings me to my next question that zooms into the problem a little bit closer to the ground. My next question is to Manu on what is the role of stakeholder participation in an NBS project? It would be great to understand this through some of your work on ground in Delhi, with various lakes and water bodies.
Yeah, thank you. Now, you see, there are two kinds of stakeholders. One is those who are organized and those who are not organized. Now, the public is really, the biggest beneficiary, but they are the ones who come under the unorganized category. The organized side is the urban local bodies, the planning authorities, who too have a stake. From my experience, I can say that so far it has been a very difficult task to convince the organized side, whereas the public at large has not been very, they have not really participated in such solutions. There are many difficulties in getting the public to participate, because everybody is ready to participate where there is some direct benefit which can be seen. But if there is a something which is a common good, it's not so easy to bring the public in, because everybody wants to have a direct correlation between the benefit and the effort being made. Right now, what's happening is that we do not have, for NBS system, we do not have performance specifications. When I speak about performance specifications, I also see that the output quality would be very clear in the case of the conventional solutions. In the case of NBS solutions, this is a somewhat gray area. So again, the authorities who are going to be the prime movers, they find it, somewhat difficult to be able to place orders, or to, be able to trust that the outcome will be as has been proclaimed to be. And when I was there in Pune, on that occasion also I mentioned that performance can vary quite greatly. Maybe on, a variable like the weather can make a lot of difference to wastewater treatment. Okay. Whereas, and if that happens in the case of an NBS solution, people are very quick to find fault with it. Even if the same happens with the conventional engineering, it's sort of taken in stride. So the stakeholders, they have their own difficulties. The public, not being so well organized, does not really push for NBS solutions. Now, of course, the picture is changing. Recently, we have been, working on some water bodies where where NGOs other than us have been able to convince the authorities that yes, we can try other solutions rather than engineering solutions. Again, I don't see much of a role for the public so far. Okay, if it becomes a wider movement, then of course I'm sure we would get results on a much larger scale. Another difficulty is the provision of land. Again, I'm talking about wastewater treatment systems. The NBS solutions, they require fairly large areas. In built-up cities, already there is great pressure on land or rather there's a lot of competitive users which make a demand on that land. So many times these solutions which require much more land, although they require much less energy, and they're probably far more cost effective. It becomes difficult. These are other constraints which come in. So even if authorities are interested, they are constrained in other manners too. So this has been my experience. If you permit me, I'd just like to enlarge a little more upon what Jaya had said about the definition of NBS. Actually, what is NBS? NBS is, it's a form of biomimicry. Nature has done everything in the last millions of years, and nature has solutions, which we now tend to apply in NBS. Natural processes, which are most energy efficient. These are, derived from nature's processes, and that is what constitutes NBS. So NBS is basically a form of biomimicry, which we can put to use in many situations, whether it's wastewater treatment, whether it is riverbank erosion, urban forestry. Urban forestry, actually, I would advocate also from the point of view of improving rainfall. The example of Catskill Mountains for New York, the entire city water supply is based on a huge watershed, which was conserved way back in 1917. The alternative proposed was very costly, piped water supply from the Hudson River. So this is a NBS solution on a very large scale.
Thank you. I think one of the key takeaways is the public is the main beneficiary, but lacks participation and trust due to lack of formal frameworks and systems to take it forward, especially in terms of operation and management. And that actually goes directly into my next question to Jaya. A lot of our conversations on topics like NBS stay within a certain type of professional communities. How can the India Forum for NBS leverage itself to bring a larger shift in thinking, of the citizens as well as by the citizens and implementing bodies?
Yes, thanks, Ambika. So I think this whole conversation on the India Forum has started because we realized as a community of practitioners, as a community of policymakers, as a community of researchers, that there are many barriers to, nature-based solutions and sort of accelerating their adoption, looking at their benefits. And I think some of those barriers were clearly, for example, there's, lack of evidence, of what nature-based solutions are, what they can do, what are their impacts. So there's limited evidence on that. There is also lack of political will and incentive to encourage cities to take on NBS. The current state of knowledge and capacities on NBS was very limited. Then we realized that there are challenges with respect to the delivery and operations and maintenance models. None of that is in place. Then there was the issue of financing. These are unconventional systems. They're not the standard engineering approach. And so, the financing models for those were not clear. Also, the financing in this area is generally lacking. Another thing was that, we realized that in India and in many other countries, the siloed working arrangements within the city governments, right? So you have your water utility working separately from the development authority, working separately from the municipal corporation, etc. The siloed working arrangements and therefore the budgetary allocations, which would have, which would only happen to these departments for certain functions, were hampering an integrated approach in general, towards mainstreaming NBS, if you may think of it in that way. And also, from the community side, I think the point being that NBS can only be successful if there's, community sort of engagement, there is ownership within community, that leads to sustenance of these solutions. And that was severely missing because of the stark inequalities and the existing developmental deficits that challenge communities' ability to engage constructively. So that's where the India Forum for NBS has stepped in. It's a joint initiative by NIUA and WRI India. It is also in partnership between the country's sort of foremost research and practice organizations working on NBS, so namely the India Climate Collaborative, WWF, TNC, and Wetlands International. And all of these organizations are looking to raise awareness and accelerate adoption of urban NBS practices. Now, when we talk about urban NBS, there is, coupled with limited awareness, experience, documented evidence about the efficacy, operationalization, financing, delivery models, etc. There is also, like Mr. Bhatnagar pointed out, there's a lack of land when you're talking about urban NBS. When you're talking about rural or peri-urban, you're talking about agroforestry, you're talking about vast tracts of land. That's in a way more easily done. In the urban context, where you have a land constraint, you're looking at nature-based solutions for not just their mitigation benefits or their carbon sequestration potential, which can be limited, but you're looking at it more as an adaptation means, as something that builds resiliency in cities and in communities. So from that standpoint, how do you mainstream it? How do you bridge these gaps that exist was the purpose of the India Forum for NBS. And the way that we are doing it and the way that we are looking to, to bring this larger shift in thinking of the citizens, implementation bodies is through a three-pronged approach. One is by defining a shared language and communicating the benefits so that you can inform actions at the local level, including scaling up of existing interventions for urban nature-based solutions where they exist. The second is by driving investments and strengthening delivery mechanisms by leveraging capacities across stakeholder groups, because there's not just the public sector or the private sector or that is responsible for bringing this into being. It's a collaborative effort between many different stakeholders, including local community. The third is enabling national and subnational policy to integrate and mainstream nature-based solutions across urban plans and projects. And this is very important because now we are seeing there are many cities which have development plans, they have climate action plans, they have heat action plans, there are a plethora of plans. Now, how do you drive coherence between these plans? How do you kind of make sure that nature-based solutions is sort of is the keystone of, kind of the solutions that are being developed in cities for climate resilience, etc. And these plans are talking to each other, the policies are integrated, is one of the things that we're looking to do. So the forum basically has set itself a lofty goal of climate proofing 100 million urban residents and about 100 billion in urban infrastructure in the country by 2030. So that's kind of the big audacious goal that we've set ourselves. The focus of the forum currently is on three things. One is building knowledge and capacity, which will be eminently useful to all the stakeholders. The second is on looking at finance and private sector engagement. Because when you look at the state of finance in nature-based solutions, I mean, globally, the investment that's going into NBS is around 154 billion, which needs to double to about 384 billion by 2025 if, climate and biodiversity goals are to be met. So, how do you bring funding and financing to this conversation? Knowing that only 17% of the total investments going into this is coming from the private sector, from private capital. So how do you increase the share of that, and how do you make private sector a big partner in this goal? And the final one is looking at the governance and to enable delivery of NBS. So what are the kind of policies, plans, practices that need to come into place to effectively deliver NBS in cities. So these are kind of the three things that the forum is focused on. And we are hoping that the idea is to leverage the strength of the collective. We individually as organizations have our strengths, we are doing our part, but the idea is to leverage the strength of the collective to accelerate action as far as NBS in the urban realm is concerned.
Thank you, Jaya. I think I'll pick on a specific point I thought that was really interesting that both you and Manu spoke about, which is the need for integrated financial or financing systems, especially how NBS projects use a lot of land, but are pushed away because of commercial projects, even though they're cost effective. So cities represent a mass of interconnected economic activities, but still often depend on states for many elementary services. And for Arti, how can cities or a collaborating organization access finance, and how do you ensure its viability?
Ambika, I think Shreya really put forward, very important point is about financing, and the low proportion of private sector finance in driving nature-based solutions. The option that we have possibly is to modulate and modify the existing financing models that we have for conventional projects, and to fit them into this mold. So, and I think I presented this even during Dhara 2023, is something that they have done in Paris to good effect, is they have used the conventional concessional contract model, wherein the city accumulates the demand, provides some of its assets, public assets, to a private company to operate those facilities and to provide a particular service to the citizens. In this case, it was cooling. And these could be long-term contracts. In case of Paris, this was a 20-year contract that the city authorities entered into with a private sector company. The role of the company was to provide energy as a service to all the consumers, and they could collect tariffs. And these tariffs, very significantly, were based on the intensity of the demand by a particular consumer. So they were also taxing the intensity. If you use more, especially at peak hours, then the tariff would be higher. Data collected in the past 10 years from this particular model is that, in Paris at least, the company is able to generate on an average about $75 million or euros annually as a turnover, and about $1 to $2 million, again, dollars and euros. I'm sorry, I do not recall the currency very accurately, for the city. So that's one model where you have used a conventional mechanism, which is a concessional contract, to integrate nature-based solutions in the city. The other could be, of course, using CSR funding. And we have seen small-scale examples of that, and probably Dr. Manu would elaborate further on that. But I have seen it and I've practiced some of them, where a particular organization or a company with funds take over the maintenance of certain parks or other areas, and maintain it for the city. In lieu of that, they sometimes may get some other benefits. In India, at least, I have not seen any case of any tax benefits for these organizations, but it's something that we could think of in the future. And lastly, is what I would call an owner-driven model. And this could be, practiced when the nature-based solutions are at in a distributed medium. So in this case, especially, and I have seen it across the world, is and a prime example would be Singapore, where they have a policy called the Lush policy, wherein building owners or developers or tenants who remove any greenery from the site for any development on the site, new or alterations or additions, are expected to replace that either through vertical greenery or horizontal greenery. So the owners and the investment is moved across the board to the users and the consumers themselves. And it can be scaled up across the years in the cities. So you could start with larger buildings, completely driven by large real estate developers, and then you could move it to smaller housing or single family housing, and so on and so forth. So at least from the perspective of heat management, these are the 2 to 3 models that could be practiced for implementing nature-based solutions in cities.
Thank you, Arti. I think we definitely need to find and modulate methods of accessing finance through a, you mentioned owner-driven model, bringing in private partners to maintain cities, and maybe even tax benefits. And a similar question to Manu, what are the regulatory or rule-based changes that need to come in if NBS needs to succeed? What are the hurdles you've experienced on ground? And how do you really measure the success of an NBS solution, at the end of it?
Uh, how do we measure the success? I think that is, basic. Because if we have achieved, some benchmark criteria, we would then be able to claim that this can be upscaled. Now, if we can consistently, for example, in wastewater treatment, deliver a particular quality of output, no matter what the weather is like, okay, no matter what is the quality or the mix in the influence, then I think that would be, a great selling point that this is a cost-effective solution, and at the same time, it is not consuming energy or very low energy consumption, that is fossil fuel-based energy. So it has got multiple other benefits. The benefits can be measured not just in direct comparison of the output quality, of the effluent quality from nature-based solutions or from a conventional engineering-based solution for wastewater treatment, but also if we add the other benefits which would be achieved by the NBS solutions. So, low energy consumption, low cost, and equal output. That I think it might weigh the scales more in favor of the NBS solutions. So, but all that needs to be, done on a reasonable scale and then upscale. I think, having pilots in a number of places that would then lead to influencing policy. Often I've come across this hurdle. Can you please show me a precedent? If I were to talk about a foreign country precedent, they will say the climate is different. Can you show something here in India? Well, Pondicherry did do a fair amount of DWAT solutions, and they were pretty good at it. But now the thing is that that is, very small scale solution. On a large scale, I think there's nothing as yet on the ground. So as Jaya pointed out, the knowledge base is somewhat, soft, disorganized, not very precise. All these, elements have to be built up so as to create a convincing story. And of course, the convincing story has to be backed by a large-scale pilot somewhere. And then I think the doors would open and the momentum would get built up. So these are some of the things which I can, say and share from my experience. I would also add, at a small scale, number of, water bodies are being filled, urban water bodies are being filled with treated wastewater. Now, treated wastewater solutions over there, they may be either mechanical or as in certain cases, they can be NBS solutions that, phyto remediation, constructed wetlands, or, soil biotreatment systems. Now, here again, the public is not really in the picture. And because it's, the government or the authorities, the local authorities do not have many other options. And in this particular case, which I'm talking about, which is a historical water body in Delhi, small one, the finance is also being provided by an NGO body. Okay, so therefore they do not really object to the NBS system. And ultimately, since they do not have to pay for it, it does not appear in their audit. It does not appear in the audit of their performance either. Okay, if there's a shortfall in the performance, then the NGO takes a hit. If there is a financial, loss, it's the NGO which takes the hit. So it does not really, trouble them that that it will work or it will not work. It's small scale, and it's not going to bring them any discredit. So it's going to go through. But once it goes through, then it creates a certain momentum. Okay, so it's what, as I was trying to say, it's the pilot which makes the difference in decision making subsequently. So we need to have sufficient pilots, pilots of sufficient scale, so that the acceptability begins to grow. The momentum then would begin to build. once you are able to show the pilots, then you can also influence the planning authorities, because in our bylaws, in our planning criteria, we must provide space for NBS. Now it's a bit difficult, of course, in brownfield situations, but in greenfield situations, it is certainly possible that you provide land for NBS solutions in the plan itself. Okay, not to look for such solutions subsequently. It becomes very difficult. So planners have a great role to play in enabling the incorporation of NBS solutions.
I think it would be interesting to present NBS to all stakeholders as not just cost effective, but also credit it as an ecological system in comparison to grey infrastructure, introduce it into our planning systems. And, Manu, you talked about the need for an example in India to even pitch projects on NBS. And Jaya, I was wondering, it would be great if you could elaborate on how WRI has attempted to break barriers and implement NBS in India.
So I'll talk about two projects. I'll talk about sort of two examples. One is some work that WRI has been engaged with in the city of Kochi. Now, Kochi basically, has been faced with a lot of sort of rainfall, precipitation, and consequent flooding, landslide, things of that nature. And compared to other sort of Indian cities, it's a fairly sort of green city, right? So for them, it came as a shocker when that started to happen. But the reason that started to happen is also because, like every other Indian city, they had started building on their blue-green assets, especially in the peripheries of the city. And that had basically led to a situation where, you have built up in places where it doesn't belong. And so, the city started flooding, you started seeing incidences of landslides becoming more frequent and so on and so forth. And then the 2018 and 19 Kochi floods, etc. So we were invited by the mayor's office and the municipal corporation to help them with certain practices which were not business as usual. They were open to experimenting with nature-based solutions, and they invited us to help them understand this and to help them implement it in a way which then they could scale and help the city and make the city more resilient. So what WRI India has been doing is we've been working in Kochi for about 4 years now to institutionalize NBS for climate resilience. And the way that we did it is, first, we started with mapping and data and baselining. So mapping restoration opportunities in the city, looking at the lands which had been degraded, which had been, where the plantation had gone away and there was an opportunity to restore those areas. The second thing we did was look at vulnerable communities, identify where they exist, and then identify their climate vulnerabilities, the hazards that they were most prone to what extent. So we found that, for example, 25% of Kochi city was vulnerable to floods. 33% of it is vulnerable to heat and, urban heat islands. Then we started looking at, pilot opportunities. Like Dr. Bhatnagar said, that, pilots are one way to sort of convince authorities because you have the proof of the pudding. And then, you can formulate the policy frameworks accordingly. So then we looked at planting pilots in a way where we partnered with the Kerala Forest Research Institute, so KFRI, to look at a scientific method for soil and species match, because that's very important. You can't be planting palm or non-indigenous species, it doesn't work. That is a kind of a maladaptation when it comes to NBS. So we wanted to avoid that. And then working with a grassroots organization called Kudumbashri, which would help mobilize the community support and ownership that was needed to sustain these efforts. So then basically there were several pilots that were put into place in the city. And then the question came, who's going to maintain these pilots? How do you, sustain these pilots? And that's where the city signed basically an MOU with the state's urban employment mission, which is called the Ayankali mission, to help with the maintenance of these pilots. And now what has happened as a result is basically they took this planting initiative, they took ownership of it, they created a branding exercise on it, calling it Kawakis. Kawakis is to plant, basically groves. And so that's in the local sort of vernacular language in Malayalam. And so they created sort of this whole personal branding around the planting activities. They made it very cool. And now the idea is to, utilize all of these mechanisms and this whole institutionalized process to take this forward and scale it. Parallelly, what we did is we gave the city, we realized that, at the district level, you have these disaster management guidance documents, you have these protocols, etc. But city doesn't necessarily have it. And most of the disaster management is approached from a rescue and recovery approach rather than from a preparedness and resilience approach. So we said that, we'll create a guidance document for the city, a policy document that they can take on, which looks at this whole process of instituting NBS or looking at disaster management and recovery from a preparedness and resilience approach. So that was again adopted by the municipal council, and now that has become sort of the bedrock of how they're approaching disaster management in the city. So that's a very good example. Similarly, there are efforts afoot in Mumbai. Mumbai, as you know, completed its climate action plan last year. That was also done by WRI along with the BMC. And now we are looking at ways of implementing, the plan in certain directions. So one was looking at vulnerable communities and looking at how to make them, climate resilient, heat resilient, flood resilient. And so NBS became an opportunity for us to look at, how we can institute that in vulnerable communities. We also looked at a different sort of typology of institutions, because we said a lot of the land in urban areas is often within the confines of, private ownership, for example, or ownership which is sort of, confined, it is not accessible to the public. So how do you get a demonstration of how NBS can be, instituted in these kind of settings? But second, also to make these institutions and these sort of private entities realize and recognize their role in sort of building community and city level resilience. So now in Mumbai, along with sort of efforts on sort of climate budgeting, looking at, setting up a governance system, institutionalizing the plan through a climate action cell, a very important component that WRI is helping the city in is with sort of, mainstreaming NBS, but also doing it in a way where you recognize that, NBS, yes, but not NBS at all costs. What are the limitations of NBS when you're looking at flooding? You can't say no green infrastructure, absolutely not. No, the idea is to basically look at how NBS can supplement, the grey infrastructure that is there or is needed in a way which is sensitive to the community, but can help, with some of the climate sort of situations in the city. So basically, looking at NBS, but in a very pragmatic way, looking at it to make sure that there aren't any maladaptations, and also looking at it in a way where it is not sort of co-opted by the private sector, because now a lot of people are coming in to say that, we want to help, we want to plant trees, that is their understanding of NBS. But we're also looking at it in a way where it does not become one of the things that falls into a greenwashing practice, by certain private sector institutions, etc. So I think that is those are two examples of the work that WRI has been doing in the cities around this.
Thank you. I think that was a good way to end this very interesting discussion on how there's a need for pilots. There's a lot of opportunity, but also understanding the limitations. A nature-based solution could be phased, as Jaya mentioned, through mapping the area, identifying vulnerable communities, especially women as they're affected the most, while collaborating with local service providers, NGOs, and using local ecology and materials. I think the eventual aim is to ultimately support cities through knowledge, finance, policy, and implementation of nature-based solutions as one of the methods of living lightly and reducing our negative effect on the environment. The vision of the India Forum for NBS also advocates for climate proofing 100 million residents and infrastructure worth $100 billion in Indian cities by 2030. With that, we've come to an end of today's discussion. Thank you to all our panelists for sparing the time and being here. To all our viewers who have tuned in, please stay tuned for more such interesting discussions with the City Climate Alliance at the India Climate Dialogues. Thank you.